Let's get some analysis and bring in Dr. Lawrence Rosenthal. He's the chair of the Berkeley Center for Right-Wing Studies, which analyses the right-wing movement of the 20th and 21st centuries. Good to talk to you. Give us a sense of your observations of this Trump campaign and why it's galvanizing so much support.
Okay. Basically, there were two large kind of political lanes for the presidential nomination among the Republicans. One was what the governor from Florida, Ron DeSantis, represented, and he was running against wokeness, against paying attention to questions of race and gender. And that, while it worked for him in Florida, did not work so well nationally. And that showed up before the votes happened in New Hampshire. The second lane was Trump's lane, and the essence of Trump's lane is grievance, is anger. What Trump has managed to do is to turn his personal grievances into something which has been taken up by his followers. They have adopted his anger and rage, and that rage has become broader and broader. It was expressed when he called his opponents in liberal America vermin. But what Haley has succeeded in doing is opening a third lane, and her lane recalls the Republican Party before Donald Trump took it over in 2016. There are considerable differences in policy around things like foreign policy, around questions like spending and taxing, and whether you've cut Social Security. And she did not lose it by enough to, I think, close out her campaign. I think there are enough people in the Republican Party and among the undecided in America who believe that Donald Trump can be beaten. And also there's a sense that his movement, so much based on anger, potentially could self-destruct. Yeah. And that's, I think, the bet that will, if Haley can continue to get financial support, that's the bet that's being made.
It's interesting you say about the grievances, because I think that's what he described himself as, Donald Trump, the protector of the little man and woman of America, which lends itself to their view of him. We've heard this morning from some of the voters in New Hampshire saying, you know, they see him as their Iron Man, some people said. He's not a politician, one said about the former president. And I wonder if, you know, this idea that narrative that he is fighting these criminal cases on their behalf adds to that sense of being the voice of the oppressed.
I think you've stated it well. One way that Trump has put it in the past is, I am your retribution. He said in New Hampshire, I don't get angry, I get even. The sense of Donald Trump representing someone who is going to smite the enemies of both himself and his MAGA base is the energy behind his movement. And it has become angrier and angrier. Even his speech tonight in New Hampshire was more angry than it was celebratory. And that's something that is very difficult to beat, because it has a quality of intimidation. That it's hard to speak out against it without worrying either about what happens to the rest of your political career, as in the case of Liz Cheney, or even worse, a sense of actual physical fear. which is a threat that seems to underlie much of Trump's campaign.
Now, let me ask you as well, you mentioned something quite clearly that you think if this is still a two-horse race, Trump many furlongs ahead at the moment. However, this was seen as what they call the Volvo and Patagonia region, independent-minded, perhaps less Trump-sympathetic than the other states. And if we see that win, let's take it from you're looking at right-wing studies and approach of what happens to the Republican Party. Let's say Trump takes the nomination. Let's say Trump loses the election in November. If that were to happen, what does that do to the Republican Party and that sphere that seems to centre right now on Donald Trump?
Well, if he wins the nomination and loses the election, there will be almost certainly a resurrection of this is a stolen election, part 2. And that has the capacity to act as a political myth and has the capacity to animate his followers. However, it's not clear that the followers would again do something like January 6th, would actually engage in violent actions. And largely that's because the Justice Department has come down so heavily. There have been thousands of arrests of people who took part in January 6th. So the rage and the myth of the stolen election will have a second act, let's call it. But the effectiveness of the second act, I think, remains to be seen.
Dr. Lawrence Rosenthal from the Berkeley Center, thank you. So it stands Donald Trump 2, the rest of the Republican Party, well, the only other candidate for now, 0.